Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be going over the bottom of the skill tree, which is lower resistance. Lower resistance is kind of a controversial one, I think, a little bit, because number one, it's really far down the tree. A lot of people don't want to put the points in to get there. I mean, you've got to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points to get to lower resistance. And unless you specifically need lower resistance, a lot of the times you don't want to invest the points to go down to it. Like, for instance, if you're a Skellymancer, you really just want to use Amplify Damage. You don't need lower resistance for that. If you're a Poison and Bone Necromancer, like you're using Bone Spear or Bone Spirit, again, you don't really need lower resistance for that because it doesn't reduce magic damage. Or doesn't reduce magic resistance. It only reduces fire, lightning, cold, and poison. No magic. It used to reduce magic, I think, a really long time ago. And they took that away pretty quickly because I think it made these skills kind of like broken OP. There is some interesting things going on with lower resistance. The first off, I think we need to cover is that lower resistance can actually break immunities. I actually have a little handy-dandy graphic, which I like to pull up on occasions for specific reasons, because it shows off everything that we need. So as you can see here, lower resistance is at maximum, basically around negative 70% resistance. It does indeed reduce the resistance of fire, cold, lightning, and poison. When it is affecting a monster that is immune to an element. So if you are casting this on a monster that has an immunity, it is applied at a penalty. And the maximum that it can do is 14% under that penalty. Basically what you do is you take whatever percentage is written on the skill and you divide it by 5, or you just negative 80% straight off of it. Whatever you want to do when it comes to this ability, you can do it a myriad of ways. But you should end up with basically around 14% if you have negative 70% resistance. Now the other problem with this ability is that you don't generally end up with negative 70. And it has to do with the heavy point cost and also the rather bad diminishing returns on the ability. So as you start putting points in, you'll notice that it goes up pretty well at the start, and then it starts to really slow down. And before you know it, you're putting in points and you're not getting any plus percentage. Like, for instance, right there, I just put in like 3 points and it was at like 64, 64, 64. Now it's at 65, and it's at 65 again, and it's still at 65. And then finally we're putting in another point and we're still at 65. So I literally just capped it out. I put 3 points in at 64% to go to 65. And then literally 1.65, 2.65, 3.65, and I'm still at 65. I didn't gain anything on the last level. And you have to put in a pretty large amount of points to get those last couple percentages. And a lot of people won't put in the points to get that. It's actually a pretty heavy investment to drop like an extra 10 points into ability and only get what, like a couple extra percentages. Let me give you an example here. I'm going to go ahead and throw my points in so I can actually wear my equipment. I've got on all my plus to skill gear. Let's just pull out these broken, hacked Hellfire and Annihilus charms that I've put in here because I don't really have proper equipment. I'm using Trangs. And if I was wearing proper equipment, I'd be, utilizing things like an Enigma maybe here, and like I probably wouldn't be using Armor King Leoric on this particular build, and then I'd probably have like a +2 helmet on and so forth and so on. So it probably is going to equal out. So anyway, I go down here and I put 1 point into the ability, right? And as you can see, I'm currently at 64% with a level 24 with only 1 point in lower resistance. Now, if I were to dump all the rest of my points in here from 64%, how many points would 10 skill points buy me? Okay, so let's try that first. So 64 to 66. I've gained 2% for 9 additional points. Let's put in 10 more additional points, right? So I've gained 2%, 10 more points. Now I'm at 68%. So I went from 64 to 68%. So I gained, for 20 whole skill points, I only gained 4 negative percentages, which is pretty pathetic when you think about it. For me to put in 19 skill points into an ability and only gain -4%, is that really worth it, do you think? And if you have the extra points, I guess, or if that is your specific goal, maybe. Like if you don't have anything else to put the points in. But for most people who are going to be building lower resistance and who probably want to start, maybe pumping some points into their skeleton or beefing up their golem mastery or maybe grab and revive down here, or maybe they want to put a couple points in bone armor so they can survive easier, those extra 19 skill points that only really netted us an extra 4% don't really seem as worth it. And then if we look at the duration, there's also some issues there as well. So we've got, let's go ahead and grab some more strength here. So let's go down here and let's look at the duration and the range. So with 1 point, I'm sitting at a duration of 66 seconds. That's literally a whole minute. And it has a radius of 20 yards with no points, with basically just 1 point. 20 yards is huge. It's ridiculous. Like, I literally cast this curse and it's going to take up most of the screen. So I'm not really gaining anything there from the actual plus to skills in terms of duration or radius, really, for that matter. Now, granted, the radius is going to increase and the duration is going to increase, but do I really need it at 32.6 yards and 104 seconds? Then there's also some other interesting things about this curse that you may or may not know. So I'm going to go over them really quickly. The first off is that the monster only needs to be cursed when the monster is poisoned. So this is a rather interesting one. And let's say, for instance, you are a poison necromancer. So we just go ahead and grab some poison skills here. And let's say you're using, poison dagger's got a 19.6 duration here. Of course, I don't have a dagger on me. But let's say you've cursed the monster, right? Once you apply your Poison Nova effect to the monster that has been cursed, you can actually recurse them with something like Amplify Damage, and the poison damage that they take will still be in effect. And this is because the poison damage is calculated upon the casting and application to the monster. And since poison has a duration, for instance, like maybe you're using Poison Explosion, which has a duration of 19.6 seconds, or Poison Dagger, which also has a duration of 19.6 seconds, they will keep the full damage despite the fact that lower resistance has ended. Now, for a skill like Poison Nova that only lasts 2 seconds, you're going to want to keep it up. But if you're using a longer duration poison, you can actually cast it, attack once, and then switch to something else and let your minions deal extra damage using Amplify Damage or maybe Life Tap to keep them alive or another curse or something, which is kind of interesting. There's really not like a whole lot more when it comes to lower resistance. I think the only other thing that we can go over is its ability to break immunities, and in reference to the Sunder charms. So the Sunder charms will break immunities too, and unfortunately lower resist is still applied under the penalty. So in a situation without the Sunder charm, the lower resistance curse has to break the immunity itself. And to give you guys an example of how this looks, I'm going to bring up a calculator real quick, and I'm going to show you guys. All right. So here's the calculator. Let's pretend we have a monster that's 120% immune to poison, right? Well, versus immunes, our lower resistance can only do a total maximum of -14%, which is going to bring that to 106, and it's not going to break. Even if we have a monster that's 110% immune to poison and we apply that -14, we're only going to bring them down to 96, which is not as good. However, if you have a monster that's broken by the Sunder charm, they will be set to 95%, and then the -14 will apply on top of the 95%, bringing them down to 81, which is, of course, going to be a hell of a lot better than 96. In this way, the Sunder Charm and the negative resistance from lore resistance can work together better. And then you can also apply other negative resistance effects, like, for instance, the negative resistance on things like Triangle's Wing, which do work in tandem with low resistance. So that negative 25% is going to apply on top of it, and it does not apply with a penalty because the negative enemy poison resistance does not break immunities. So the only things that get applied the penalty are things that can actively break an immunity. So combining lower resistance with the Sunder Charm, with items like Triangle's Wing and Death's Web, I thought that was Death's Web. With Death's Web, you can get some pretty sick negative numbers, and you can bring a monster as close to negative 100% as you're probably ever going to get. In fact, if we calculate it, I can just calculate it right now, because Death's Web is 50%. Triangle's Wing is negative 25, so that's already 75%. Then lower resistance is going to give us an additional 14% versus that target. So we're looking at 89, right? So negative 89% right there just from the Triangle's Wing, the Death's Web, and the lower resistance curse. And then we can also apply a facet in the weapon, and we can apply a facet in the shield. So we get an extra 10% there, which is going to bring us to 99%, negative 99%, which is going to bring the monster down to negative 4% poison resistance in totalis there. And of course, we could also potentially add another poison facet to the helmet, or maybe even utilize something like Arcane's Valor with a poison facet in it. And before you know it, you've got your negative poison resistance down to an incredibly low amount. I'm pretty sure that's it, actually. I don't think there's anything to go over when it comes to lower resistance. Obviously, lower resistance is useful only to a select number of skills. It's very useful to the poison skills. And in fact, is actually the only spell that reduces poison. Conviction, which is the one that everybody loves because it's on infinity and the paladins have it, does not reduce poison resistance. Lower resistance is the only one that reduces poison resistance, and the only one that can break poison resistances besides the poison Sunder Charms. It's also important to note that any monster that can be broken with lower resistance can be broken by level 9 lower resistance. So the highest level that you need to break any monster that's actually capable of being broken with just the spell is level 9. Anything that has a higher resistance cannot be broken anyway, so the higher level lower resistances actually won't break any of those monsters at all. But now that we have Sunder Charms, it's a little bit different. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when I'm just yakking about some lower resistance. And I hope this video helped you out a little bit. And as always, keep watching.